Hare Krishna. Vanchakalpatrubhyascha kripasindhubhye patitanam avanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Welcome to our continuation of the study of Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 2, Divinity and Divine Service. And we've just started that chapter. We did text 7 last time, and then went through Prabhupada's purport, but we did not get through to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's purport, so we'll do that. So first we'll say, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, Canto 1, Text 2, Divinity and Divine Service, Chapter 2, Text 7, goes like this. Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojataha Janayatyashu Vairagyam Jnanam Jnanam Chayadharaitukam. By rendering devotional service unto the personality of Godhead Sri Krishna, one immediately acquires causeless knowledge and detachment from the world. And Prabhupada then goes on to discuss the fact of these two, jnana and vairagya. We discussed those two, and the idea of ahaituki, causeless, here meaning disinterested or having no motive for its own sake. So this is, then when we go to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's, his commentary begins, what form does that satisfaction of the mind take? Because the previous verse, yayatma suprasidati, so that's the devotional service must be unmotivated and uninterrupted in order to completely satisfy the self. So he says, his commentary to verse 7 begins, what form does that satisfaction of the mind take? Referring to the previous verse. So, Atma suprasidati, in the previous verse, he understands as which satisfies the mind completely, because the word Atma, self, can, according to circumstance, denote the body, the mind, or the soul, and Prabhupada takes it as the soul. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur takes it as the mind. So he says in his commentary to 7, what form does that satisfaction of the mind take? That satisfaction of the mind is filled with knowledge and experience of the form, qualities, and sweetness of the Lord, which causes complete disgust with all inferior objects. So we gave our name to restaurants, the higher taste. By experiencing a higher taste becomes fixed in consciousness. So that is explained in this verse. This bhakti is endowed, yojitaha, in an excellent manner. This pra for prakarshena, with dasya, sakya, servitorship, friendship, and other loving emotions. Another meaning of Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha is Bhakti Yoga has been made the only goal, Prayojana. Separate endeavor for attaining knowledge and detachment are not necessary in the practice of bhakti, for bhakti itself produces them. It's good to know. If you just do the bhakti part, you'll get the knowledge and detachment. So you don't have to worry about doing something else. Very quickly, ashu, at the time of performing bhakti, they are attained. For it is said, and now he quotes from Bhagavatam 11th Canto, 2-42, Bhakti paresh anubhavo virakti anyatya traisha tika ekakalaha prapadyamanasya yatashnatas yus tushti pushti shutta payom gasam. Devotion, direct experience of the Supreme, and this is Prabhupada's translation to this quoted verse. Devotion, bhakti, direct experience of the Supreme Lord, that's para isha anubhava, paresha anubhava, and virakti, detachment. So those three things, right? Devotion, direct perception or experience of the Lord, and detachment, anyatra, from other things, whatever else. These three, this trika, this triad, occurs simultaneously, ekakala, for one who has taken shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, in the same way that pleasure, nourishment, and relief from hunger come simultaneously and increasingly with each bite for a person engaged in eating. So there doesn't have to be a separate endeavor. Devotion, direct experience in the Supreme Lord, they occur together. When you eat, each bite tastes good, you get nourished, and your hunger subsides. Three things happen at once by the same action. So these things happen also by taking shelter. One who is in the process of taking shelter, prapadyamanasya, of the Supreme Lord. He goes on, there is an objection that if one possesses knowledge, one attains liberation. In answer to this, the verse says that this knowledge is a height to come without motivation for liberation. In other words, liberation is a side effect. It happens, but that's not the reason. A haituki comes from the word hetu, meaning cause or purpose. Just as one can say he lives for eating, meaning he lives for the goal of eating. So in this case, jnanam ahaitukam means knowledge without the goal of liberation. Because if you read most people of Vedanta, the goal of getting knowledge is to be liberated. This is just knowledge without that goal. Therefore, by practicing bhakti, in which knowledge also manifests without the goal of liberation, the liberation of merging does not take place. Knowledge, in this case, means knowledge and experience of the Lord's form, qualities, and sweetness. He quotes from the 4th Canto, the stage of Prema Bhakti completely dedicated to Vasudeva produces the complete jnana and vairagya. So these are side effects. They come automatically. And he said, Vishnu Chakravarti goes on, one should practice bhakti with only that goal in mind, devoid of desire for liberation or other goals. The next verse, which in the Canto 4, which he's quoting, shows that this type of bhakti is the cause of another type of bhakti. And that verse is translated, O saintly king, one who hears and studies with faith very soon attains the shelter topics of the Lord to attain prema. So this devotional service and practice gives fulfillment in prema. Thus it is established in this verse that bhakti alone functions as both the cause and the goal, and not knowledge or detachment. That's a nice purport. Yeah. So now we are going to 8. Is that right? Where we are? Mm-hmm. So text 8 is Dharma swanushtita pumsam vishvaksena katasuyaha nutpadayat yadi ratim shrama eva hi kevalam. The occupational activities a man performs according to his own position are only so much useless labor if they do not provoke attraction for the message of the personality of Godhead. So dharma, and then swanushtitaha, Prabhupada in the word for word says, executed in terms of one's own position, and then pumsam, of humanity, humankind, and then vishvaksena. Vishvaksena is a name for God. One whose hosts go everywhere. Because Sena, Vishvak, everywhere, and Sena means basically army. So Vishvaksena Kata, the Lord of the, we would say in Christianity, the Lord of hosts. Because hosts here means troops or armies. I think there's one heavenly hosts sing hallelujah. Heavenly hosts of angels. So this word host means troops or armies or organized groups of things, the hosts. That's the meaning of this. And the word swanushtita, which is translated here, executed in terms of one's own position, swanushtita means well observed, duly practiced or performed, done that way. And then if you do this, but it still doesn't produce attraction for topics of the Lord. Bhanuswami translates that Varnashram Dharma of the human being which does not produce attraction for topics of the Lord is only wasted effort. The word shrama eva hi kevalam, which Prabhupada translates as useless effort, useless labor. The word for shrama in Sanskrit means exhaustion, weariness, fatigue, so labor, toil, hard work of any kind. And this is the dictionary. Hard work of any kind, as in performing acts of bodily mortification, religious exercises, and austerity. So it will just be that and nothing more. Just hard work for nothing if it does not do that. But when it says dharma swanushtita, you do what your duty, you do your own thing, you do your duty properly. But it's just, and you do it, with this idea of the swanushtita. It's well done. Swanushtita means well done, well duly practiced, correctly performed. Still, it's got to just not just doing it for its own sake, but you should get from that bhakti. Prabhupada's purport. He says, there are different occupational activities in terms of man's different conceptions of life. To the gross materialist, who cannot see anything beyond the gross material body, there is nothing beyond the senses. Therefore, his occupational activities are limited to concentrated and extended selfishness. So you may think your dharma, according to your own position, might refer to the works of Varnashram Dharma, but Prabhupada, remember, has a different audience in mind, and this is the beginning of the book. So he says occupational activities in terms of conception. So here's the gross materialist, first of all. Nothing beyond the senses. Therefore, his occupational activities are limited to concentrated and extended selfishness. Concentrated selfishness centers on the personal body. This is generally seen amongst the lower animals. Extended selfishness is manifested in human society and centers on the family, society, community, nation, and world with a view to gross bodily comforts. So that's the other thing. If somebody who works very hard and sacrifices himself, the extended selfishness for that person's family or his racial group, Black Liberation Movement or some, not that these aren't problems there, but still it's based on the bodily conception. You sacrifice. There's the guy who doesn't care about anybody else but his own sense gratification. And then it's, okay, I got a family, I'll take care of them. Or I've got a particular ethnic group or racial group to which I belong, I'll take care of that. There's the nation. Soldiers go to war. They sacrifice bodily limbs and other things to defend their nation in a war. They become heroes. They get medals. Their names are remembered. They're honored in plaques afterwards, Medal of Honor winners and all that other things. But he's saying this is extended selfishness. It's just for your country or for your group. So that's another kind of selfishness. Because basically, what are you getting for them? Mostly is the ability for sense gratification, other things. Then he goes on, above these gross materialists are the mental speculators who hover aloft in the mental spheres. And their occupational duties involve making poetry, and philosophy, or propagating some ism. So now you're in the university professors and people like that, propagating some ism with the same aim of selfishness limited to the body and the mind. Like a poet, okay, he does something very pleasing, and even after your nation is gone, people may read that poetry and study that poetry or verses or see the plays of Shakespeare and, all that kind of stuff. So it lasts longer in some ways. The nation or the people you've written it for may have disappeared from earth, but the immortal word remains, like that. So that's another kind of extended selfishness. Body and the mind. Mind may be more than the body. But above the body and mind is the dormant spirit soul. Dormant means sleeping, unactive, whose absence from the body makes the whole range of bodily and mental selfishness completely null and void. If the soul goes, the rest of it's no good. But less intelligent people have no information of the needs of the spirit soul. So here right away, very early on, Prabhupada is bringing this. We have to see, what does the eternal soul need? Because foolish people have no information of the soul and how it is beyond the purview of the body and mind, they are not satisfied in the performance of their occupational duties. The question of the satisfaction of the self is raised here. The self is beyond the gross body and subtle mind. So this is really news for the West. The difference between, when I was in university, I was a philosophy major, and no distinction was ever made between mind and soul. Thinking of the soul as the self, but didn't really see it systematically. Whereas what we learn from Bhagavatam, there's the gross body, the subtle body, and then the spirit soul. The spirit soul, at the time of death, has various desires and longings unfulfilled, acquires another gross body, takes the subtle body with him, or her, or whatever. That soul takes the subtle body and again acquires a gross body according to the karma and the desires that are still there. Liberation really means liberation from the subtle body. We shuffle off the mortal coil, as in Shakespeare's play, that's death is described as shuffling off the mortal coil. But actually you don't unless you're liberated. The mortal coil, you shuffle off one mortal coil, which is the gross body, but you take with you the subtle body, and so therefore you get another gross body according to what's in the subtle body. So you really, to shuffle off the second mortal coil of the subtle body, that's liberation. And in the Bhagavatam, it's defined that way. Liberation means liberation from the subtle body. Because you have so many desires and longings still at the time of death, then that's what happens. So, anyway, the second paragraph again, because foolish people have no information of the soul and how it is beyond the purview of the body and mind, they are not satisfied in the performance of their occupational duties. The question of the satisfaction of the self is raised herein. The self is beyond the gross body and subtle mind. He, the self, is the potent active principle of the body and mind. Without knowing the needs of the dormant soul, the sleeping soul, one cannot be happy simply with the emolument of the body and mind. The body and the mind are but superfluous outer coverings of the spirit soul. The spirit soul's needs must be fulfilled. Simply by cleansing the cage of the bird, one does not satisfy the bird. One must actually know the needs of the bird himself. And one of the illustrations of Prabhupada's Bhagavatam, when it was done with the help of artists and ISKCON artists, was to show a lady cleaning the cage and the bird is lying down. Some way it's corny, but it drives the point home. The need of the spirit soul is that he wants to get out of the limited sphere of material bondage and fulfill his desire for complete freedom. And you may ask yourself, where does that desire come from? How do we have that desire for complete freedom? How did it get there? Next sentence, he wants to get out of the covered walls of the greater universe. He wants to see the free light and the spirit. That complete freedom is achieved when he meets the complete spirit, the personality of Godhead. There is a dormant, remember dormant means sleeping. There is a dormant affection for God within everyone. So we all are endowed with love for God, but we place that love on substitutes which don't really fulfill us. Actually, there's something missing here. Who is it? One of Shakespeare's characters describes his or her love as the god of my idolatry. They know it's idolatry, but we have something there. The god of my idolatry.
It's in Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah, it's in Romeo and Juliet, yeah. I think it's Juliet's line, right, referring to Romeo as the god of my idolatry. They knew there was something wrong with it. In those days, still. But there is a dormant affection for God within everyone. Spiritual existence is manifested through the gross body and mind in the form of perverted reflection for gross and subtle matter. So that's why it's never satisfied. Used to say in commercials, accept no substitute. Therefore, we have to engage ourselves in occupational engagements that will evoke means call out, evoke our divine consciousness. This is possible only by hearing and chanting the divine activities of the Supreme Lord, and any occupational activity which does not help one to achieve attachment for hearing and chanting the transcendental message of Godhead is said herein to be simply a waste of time. Shrama eva hi kevalam, nothing but hard work, and that's it. This is because other occupational duties, whatever ism they may belong to, cannot give liberation to the soul. Even the activities of the salvationists, that is, people who are aiming at their own salvation, Prabhupada refers them as salvationists because there's still some selfishness there, Whereas for a devotee, salvation ends up being the side effect. The real aim is prema, love of God, and as a matter of course, you don't take birth again. Even the activities of the salvationists, here it means the Mayavadis who aim at their own, that's their main thing, their own desire for liberation. Even the activities of the salvationists are considered to be useless because of their failure to pick up the fountainhead of all liberties. So that's God. They don't quite see that. The gross materialist can practically see that his material gain is limited only to time and space, either in this world or in the other. Even if he goes up to the Svargaloka, he will find no permanent abode for his hankering soul. The hankering soul must be satisfied by the perfect scientific process of perfect devotional service. This is a great purport. It's really something that should be studied. It really covers a lot of territory in a few words and really says it. We may not know Svargaloka. You can go, another thing, you go to these higher planets, which are places of sometimes fairly gross, with the apsaras and the heavenly society girls, Prabhu calls them, up there. Or you can even go to Svargaloka, but your good karma runs out and you come back down again. Because of that still is a selfish desire. Then the translation of Bhanuswami following Vishwanath Chakravarti, very different of this one. That Varnashram Dharma of the human being, which does not produce attraction for topics of the Lord, is only wasted effort. It's very terse, huh? And here, Dharma, in terms of your occupational duties, that's typically thought of as Varnashram Dharma. You notice again, Vishwanath Chakravarti's audience are people in India who are Hindus in India. That's his range of people who he's addressing. Prabhupada is now addressing the whole world. It's like he has to really get a whole new way of explaining these verses to fit that situation, yet it's universal. But that explains their difference in the way they deal with this. And so his commentary is, why is Dharma in the form of Varnashram not considered to be Parodharma, the highest Dharma? This verse answers that question. The Dharma undertaken by men, this is called, by the way, in Sanskrit, Swadharma. According to your position in Varnashram Dharma, this is your Swadharma, your personal Dharma. And if you are born in a Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra community, then that sets what your undertaking should be in your education and your training and your goals. The head, arms, bellies, and legs of society. And devotional service is transcendental to that. You can do any one of these swadharmas and still be liberated if you dedicate the results to Krishna. Anyway, the That dharma undertaken by men, brahmanas, kshatriyas, vaishyas, and sudras, which does not produce attraction for talks about the Supreme Lord, is completely useless. The Shruti says, Karmani pitri loke. By performance of varnashram duty, one goes to pitri loka in the material world. He's quoting from the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad, the world of the forefathers, the pitris. Performance of varnashram duties does not produce attraction for the Lord. And then he quotes Narada's statement from the 4th canto, 431.10. I'll skip the Sanskrit. Without that service, what is the use of taking 3 births by semen, upanayanam, and initiation? We have the 3-verse conception. At the time of birth, there's I forgot what it's called now, and then initiation. Yeah, the what do we the word left my head. Well, after a child is born, you perform certain ceremonies, anyway. So these 3 births. Garbhodanana samskara. There's samskaras all along, and just after childbirth there's samskaras for the child. And there's in fact a series of them, and then initiation. Anyway, what is the use of ritual acts mentioned in the Vedas? What is the use of a lifespan of a devata for a human? He skips a verse and says, what is the use of yoga, sankhya, sannyas, study of the Vedas, other auspicious acts in which the Lord does not give realization of himself? So these 2 verses quoted from the 4th canto, 4:31, 10, and 12. Because it does not produce attraction for topics about the Lord, it is merely useless endeavor. Because of the temporary nature of the results of performing varnashram duties, such as attainment of pitriloka, one should give up those duties, swadharma, and perform the parodharma mentioned in the previous verse, consisting of hearing and chanting about the Lord. I'm not going to read the rest of this. It gets into complicated stuff here, which not that relevant to us here. So, yeah, let me just. Yeah. Okay, so we'll start with 9. We won't be able to get very far in it. But text 9, Dharmasya hyapavargyasya narto tayo papkalpate nartasya dharmaikantasya kamo labhaya hismitaha. All occupational engagements are certainly meant for ultimate liberation. They should never be performed for material gain. Furthermore, according to sages, one who engages in the ultimate occupational service should never use material gain to cultivate sense gratification. So this word is apavargya. Next time we'll talk about Prabhupada does a kind of little play on the word of that one, but here it means liberation. So all dharmas are meant for this ultimate liberation, and their artha is not meant for artha. Na artha artaya. Their purpose is not material gain. And that, anyway, the sages say one who is engaged in this dharma eka anta, one who's engaged in the ultimate occupational service, eka, should never be done for kama, sense gratification. Bhanuswami's translation, a little simpler. Material results are not suitable as the goal for persons dedicated to higher spiritual goals. Attainment of material aspects is not the desire of the person who is dedicated to the higher paths. Anyway, so we'll pick up there with that 9th verse here. Prabhupada, for apavarga, uses play on words. We'll see what it is the next time. Where pavarga is the row in the alphabet going pa pa ba ba ma, the labial. Each one stands for a certain word. There's different versions of it.
If anybody has a comment or question, reflection, anything that struck you in today's class or Prabhupada's commentary or the verses, please feel free to share. If you're on Facebook, go ahead and type your comment or question into the comment section there. If you're on the phone, you can press *6 to unmute yourself. And the chat box on Ravindra Svarupa's website is also available for those who want to post it more privately than publicly. That's RSDasa.com. As we're waiting for some questions to come down, this idea that Vishnacharya Thakur expresses in his commentary to the 7th verse about how just practicing bhakti, detachment will come on its own.
Yeah.
And okay, so my question is, some of us on this call, including myself, have been listening to some other classes in the first canto and starting the second canto about Varnashrama Dharma, and there's been a lot of discussion about going through the ashramas and especially going from Grihastha to Vanaprastha ashram, and kind of this need that's not always prevalent of detaching from family. And thinking of that in relationship to what we're talking about today, is something like detachment from family something you actively need to be doing, or should you be just focusing more on chanting and service and the direct, bhakti engagements, and the necessary detachment will come on its own accord?
One has to be aware of the temporary nature of all things. And I think that anyone who's practicing devotional service has to understand how fragile all material arrangements are, and that anything you happen to be attached to, either as family unit, as people, as part of a nation, as part of a spiritual movement, even all those relationships are, or you could have just a position in a religious hierarchy. Mm-hmm. All those things are temporary. And it's true that if you're a devotee and you cultivate that kind of attachment, a detachment from things, give up those kind of attachments based on just what you see in the material world, one will find out that it can. The Prabhupada had said that we shall have another ISKCON in the spiritual world, to which I added, but no GBC. He said that we are eternal associates, So you can know that, but that's so and devotional service that you perform in association with other devotees. If it's on the spiritual platform, there's no problem. If it's there, you're doing it, working together to please Prabhupada and to please other devotees without any idea of any gain for yourself. That's what you need to do. I mean, it is a fact that bhakti yoga can be done in a community of devotees. You don't have to go off and be a hermit all by yourself, although you may prefer it that way. That's certainly allowable. But basically, if you want to hear and chant about Krishna, there has to be somebody to hear and chant with. You have to engage your senses. That's bhakti. So it's basically a group activity. But you can't take those institutional structures there and then use them for your own self-aggrandizement in some fashion or another, looking for wealth, position, whatever else. That would be a misuse. So that's one has to bear that in mind, I would say. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It helps, and I'll add a little bit more to that. That just, would it be correct to say that just as holding on to those sort of relationships or positions for your own material gain would be detrimental in the long run, and also falsely renouncing those relationships for the sake of material gain, that can happen in spiritual societies. Of the more renounced you are, the more famous you are, whatever it might, the more money, whatever it might be, that could also be detrimental. And I guess I was more also just thinking of, like, do you have to be actively cultivating detachment, or is it better to be focusing directly on just hearing, chanting, and that detachment that's necessary will naturally come?
To me, it will naturally come. But I think as time goes on, you're just more and more naturally aware of the temporary nature of everything and our provisional existence in this world. And, I'm 75 years old. Death is the next big event. That. So, and that's a good thing, growing older. That way you don't make big, long plans for your future in some ways.
Thanks, that's helpful. Gaur Shakti Prabhu says, Hare Krishna, dear Gurudev, please accept my humble obeisances. Thank you so much for this afternoon's class. You mentioned the phrase extended selfishness earlier. As devotees, how do we rationalize this notion of knowing that we are not the body, yet still be sympathetic towards marginalized groups in the material world and show our support and solidarity?
I think the best thing you can, there may be the master and there may be the slave, but in the course of history, they tend to change places. And who is the slave becomes the master and has somebody else to become the slave. I mean, really one has to come to just a higher platform of just having position and power and control over others. That's the problem. Nobody should use others simply for their sense gratification or exploitation for your own advantage. And of course, if you understand transmigration, whatever you do unto other will be done unto you, good or bad. So if you really want to, set people free, they have to become free from designations, including skin color, gender, all those various things that people are obsessed with in different ways. You're not your body, and also you're not your mind, for that matter. So that's really keep that in mind if you really want to help people out. That has to be very, very clear. Hardly anybody understands this. They are so caught up in some material identity or idea themselves, and that in itself is their own bondage, no matter how much they're thinking they're the master.
On that topic, I've always appreciated how you've often said that we need to keep in mind that having position over somebody else isn't... We so oftentimes think of it as, oh, now I have power over somebody, but in reality it should mean that I have more responsibility for somebody, like the connection between power and responsibility.
What are my obligations toward this other people? What are my duties toward this person? I mean, you have little children, and those little children are under your care, and you have power over them. But boy, you have duties toward them that are quite taxing,
Also, you had mentioned in class today how liberation means liberation from the subtle body. So in that context, is that how we can get some, a liberated person who still has, the external coverings of a gross body, that they're, can your mind, your subtle body be liberated in the sense of connected to Krishna, but you're still in the material world? Somebody like Srila Prabhupada. And
yeah, well, that's called Jivan Mukta.
Yeah. I found that kind of interesting, that we oftentimes think of liberation as just the gross body, but the subtle body is more
the subtle body is more problematic even. Remember, the subtle body is brought with us for previous lives. We don't even know what's in there sometimes.
And Adi Devi Dasi says, Hare Krishna, dear Gurudev, does Vasudev Datta referred to in the Chaitanya Charitamrita refer to Jesus Christ? Someone mentioned it to me but didn't know the source.
Vasudev Datta? I've never, no, I haven't heard of that in the Chaitanya Charitamrita.
And Mandaleshwari Devidasi says, Hare Krishna, please accept my humble obeisances. Thank you for your kindness to put your time and energy to give us this opportunity to hear Bhagavatam from you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for letting me do this.
Oops, and we have... There's a wireless caller with a comment, but I'm not quite sure who the person is, but go ahead.
I be heard?
Oh yeah, hey, we can hear your voice.
Oh, okay. Hare Krishna, Ravindra Svarupa dasa. Please let me have more businesses. This is Ravindra in Hawaii. Aloha.
Aloha.
Usually I just type in my message, but this I thought I should just ask because I didn't want to come out the wrong way. Sometimes you mention how Srila Prabhupada, he has Babu English.
Who?
Srila Prabhupada had Babu English.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So it seems like in these the first part of the Bhagavatam, the first canto, especially the first chapter, the way Srila Prabhupada writes is markedly different than he does than he writes in the rest of the Bhagavatam. It seems like I'm just speculating here. It seems like he really put a lot of time and thought into these purports and the translations with kind of flowery language compared to the rest of the Bhagavatam. Do you know what I mean? Is that something that you've noticed, or
Of course.
not accurate?
Because he did the writing himself, and then when he came to America, he then began dictating, and depending upon disciples to edit it into standard English. Sometimes I listen to Prabhupada's tapes of dictation. It's very interesting, but it's just a different way of doing it. I think. I mean, I really like the first volume that he brought with him because it's got his voice a little more clearer. And of course, he was racing against time and trying to get all the books out very, very quickly and so on. So there was just the circumstances were different. But I think the first volume is really, the first canto rather, is really very nice because of Prabhupada's doing it all by himself. And I really like actually not even reading the edited version, because although it's not standard English, it has a rhythm and a kind of a voice that is lost a bit when it's even been edited for the American or Western world audience.
Is that good, Ramananda Prabhu? Any further follow-up questions on that?
No, that's nice. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
No, I had a problem, when I first was trying to use one of Prabhupada's books for a university course. Because and we didn't even have the BBT volumes yet. We just had the original volumes. It was very difficult because of the irregularities which academics would have you every time there's something a little irregular, or even a misspelling or typo. You'd have to have a little brackets with the word the phrase "sick as I see," thus showing that this was in the original and it's not your mistake or not your unusual arrangement of things. So it's a favor to actually have them redone. That Prabhupada wanted them done into sort of standard Anglo-American English.
Going back to some earlier discussions, Bhakti Pala says, I really liked the Vishwakshena, Lord of Hosts part. Thanks for a very nice class. And then Tosi Priya asks, she says, thank you, Gurudev. Could you discuss the distinction between the concept expressed by the phrase spiritual bypassing and preaching the absolute truth via the concept you're not that body?
Spiritual bypassing?
That might be a new phrase for you.
I'm not, that's a new expression for me, yeah.
Tulsi Priya, would you like to define spiritual bypassing for all of us? And as you're doing that, I can read that Charachandra clarified about the Jesus and Vasudeva Datta thing. He says, no, but he wanted to die for the sins of the world. Similar situation, but he was not Jesus.
Oh yeah, Prabhupada said about that, yeah.
And Tulsi Priya also added that Prabhupada compares Jesus Christ and Vasudeva Datta. There's no mention of them being one and the same.
Yeah, okay. I remember now about Vasudeva Datta. I'll be willing to take everybody's sins on me, yeah.
And just waiting to see if Tulsi Priya, are you going to define spiritual bypassing for us in your own words? Or if anybody else wants to write it in. I know it's a phrase that's been thrown around recently.
Really? I don't know.
Here's a definition from Bhakti Google. A spiritual bypass is a tendency to use spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep or avoid facing unresolved emotional issues, psychological wounds, and unfinished developmental tasks.
Yeah, well, we shouldn't, as the Bible says, that you shouldn't cast your pearls before swine or give what is holy unto dogs. You shouldn't take spiritual concepts and use them for your various material or psychological crutches or things like that, yeah. And that can be done.
Or even on a social level, right? Like, we've seen this, and these have been parts of some discussions recently of just using that phrase, "Oh, we're not our bodies," in almost in a way to ignore the social issues that might take place.
Mm-hmm.
Or if somebody is feeling discriminated against, to say, "Well, you're not your body," you know. And
Yeah.
basically, obviously you're not advanced enough to overcome it, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Any further comments on that?
Nope.
Okay. I think this is it for today. Oh, here we go. Tulsi Priya writes in. But devotees are accused of spiritual bypassing when we say things like "you're not the body," when devotees are discussing experiences of racism, sexism, etc.
Yeah, well, you also have to worry about how you treat other people or how other people are being treated. They should actually be all valued. Okay, so we start, how far do we get?
We just started verse 9.
So we'll start with, okay, Bhagavatam 129. Until then, thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.